you a bit of an overview of some of the work we are doing, particularly around planning of future systems, power systems and markets. As Raman said, I spend most of my time here at MIT, but I also do half of my work approximately at Audun National Lab. So since Raman is recording this, I guess I should try to behave and also say that everything, all opinions are mine and no one else's, that's important these days. Okay, so I run this group here and you can see some members in the room, but there's a bit, okay, so that's from last year. For MIT people that I interact with, and we look at energy transition questions primarily on the power systems, electricity market side of things. So we try to develop new tools, new analytics to analyze questions around the planning and operation of current and future electricity systems, and also the connections between the electricity system and the wider energy system. So we use different tools from energy economics and power systems engineering towards more like general optimization, simulation, machine learning methods to look at questions around zero carbon energy systems markets, green energy technologies, and also electricity market design is something I'm very interested in for a long time. So I'm in Linz, but I also interact closely with MIT and CEPR on campus. Give you a little bit of a flavor of some of the questions we are looking at. Right now I have one postdoc, she's not here. She's looking at better control algorithms for temperature control in buildings. So that's very local, happening here on campus, trying to save energy and climate emissions for MIT. We do some work on optimizing transportation, electrification of transportation. So we have a case study of or parts of the MBTA system, also local. I would say most of the work is more like regional in nature. So we look at like solutions, operational planning solutions for power, in this case, the southeast of this country. But also sometimes I have a visiting research scientist here who was trying to look at global renewable hydrogen supply. So there's estimating what are the best spots globally to produce green hydrogen. So it's quite a range of very local to global types of analysis. Just a couple of words about Argon. That's you young researchers, you could keep in mind that national labs, they also do quite a bit of research. You can see some numbers here. Argon has a quite prominent history. It goes back to Enrico Fermi and the first controlled nuclear reaction that they did at the University of Chicago. They moved that outside to the suburbs of Chicago and formed Argon National Lab in 1946. You can see the number. It's a pretty large-scale enterprise doing, from basic to applied research. I belong to a team that looks at, the same type of questions I just described here at MIT. The national labs are kind of or DOE in general, because DOE, the Department of Energy, is funding most of the research at the labs. DOE is kind of in hibernation mode for the time being because of the government shutdown, but they have their priorities. They have been changing, obviously, but one of the key priorities is data centers and supercomputers. This announcement just came out last week. So the DOE, in collaboration with NVIDIA and Oracle, they are going to install 100,000 GPUs from NVIDIA at Argonne National Lab. So that's going to be the largest search system in the DOE complex. So one of the things that the labs are doing is to provide experimental and computing resources that others can benefit from as well. So keep that in mind, that those types of resources are out there.
They are really not open to everybody.
I mean, some of them are, many of them are. Yeah. But someone told me that this would lead to like an electricity consumption of around 200 megawatts out around the lab. Megawatts, yeah. So that's
200 megawatts.
Yeah, that's pretty significant in the suburbs of Chicago. That's, I don't know, I haven't done those calculations, but there are large power consumption. It's involved in these types of.
Quick question. So if they are partnering with Oracle, does that mean they are building some kind of like off-site system for those devices? Because I was with MCS people, so
Yeah.
I know there's a big server room
Yes.
in that building, but are they kind of building a new one?
I don't know, but I don't know. I would think that they place it next to the current facility, so I don't know the details. Yeah. Okay, so just a little bit of statistics. Are we transitioning towards zero carbon? There are some pieces of good news occasionally. So this graph shows the total electricity production, like for the first year, 25, compared to previous first half of the year. And the good news here is that renewable is actually overtaking coal in global electricity generation. If you look at the last 6 years, renewables are growing fast, but at the same time, you see that the other resources are pretty much constant. So renewables contribute to demand growth, but there is not much in terms of reducing the use of coal and fossil fuels at the global scale. If you look at the US, the picture is a little bit different because coal generation has reduced from around 40% back here around 2010 and down to 15% as of last year. And the shift has been from coal towards renewables partly, and also to more natural gas use in electricity generation. And both of those, of course, lead to lower climate or greenhouse gas emissions. So I work a lot on renewable energy, so it's exciting to look at graphs like this that show the expansion of wind, solar. Wind in blue, the first wave was from wind power, then more recently solar power, and then the green parts of the graph, that is batteries, energy storage, which have been coming in big time in the US in the last few years. If you look at this compared to some other countries and regions out there, it's still fair to say that the US, with 24% of electricity generation from renewables, is behind many other owners of the world, including globally, where the percentage is 32%. So definitely there's room for much more renewables, I would say, in the US as well. Energy storage is something that we're working on quite a bit, and it's, this again shows the growth in the last few years. It's continuing to grow this year, as far as I know, and that, of course, has to do with a reduction in cost of these technologies that have come down extensively in the last 10-20 years. That's the lithium-ion batteries. So in many parts of the world, solar energy in particular, and also combined with batteries, is a very cheap, perhaps the cheapest way of building or getting new electricity generation as of today. Okay, so this is a plot from Cal ISO, the system operator in California. It shows how they dispatched their system for one day back in early September. It's kind of a random day. The interesting thing, or there are a couple of interesting things. You see there's a lot of renewables, solar and wind. Solar coming in the morning and then dropping off at the end of the day. But additionally, you would balance the system with primarily natural gas, hydro, and imports. These days, as you can see from the dispatch plot, batteries are playing an equally or perhaps more prominent role in balancing the variability from solar and wind by discharging at the end of the day and then charging, and you have surplus renewables in the middle of the day. So 10 gigawatts or so of batteries charging and discharging on a daily basis. So that's that's showing that these types of resources are starting to have a substantial impact on the dynamics of these systems and markets. And that's very exciting because these types of plots we would see as outputs from our dispatch and planning tools 5 or 10 years ago. Now it shows up in reality in the systems out there. So that's great.
Does that include degradation cost of lithium? Lithium is pretty high. Is that just capital? What is lithium cost?
I mean, on the previous, this is
batteries in general. Yeah.
This is the upfront investment cost, basically.
But not degradation cost. It's pretty
No,
high on
the-
lithium.
Degradation, yes, that's right. And degradation, we are looking at that. And it also degradation depends on your operational.
Yes, we have a
strategy.
student, maybe we should talk about that because I was very surprised how high that is.
Basically means that you need to replace your equipment more quickly. So you have to, you get the capital cost repeated.
Mhm.
Maintain your system. Loads are growing again in the US. This is a recent plot. It's been flat more or less for the last 15, 20 years, but primarily because of data centers, loads are growing again. EIA is expecting around 3%. If you look historically, though, if you look back to the 90s, before the 90s, we had load growth rates that were higher than that traditionally. So it's not really new, but it's a change compared to the last 20 years or so. This rapid
This is
increase
because
in
of the AI growth? Why is this because? The recent growth?
Yes, it is. That's a key driver of the data centers and AI use, exactly.
I think half of the increase is because of data centers.
And in the previous thing, in the terms of cost, is there some kind of data which is available on operational cost of batteries? Do you know?
Operational cost like, I mean, maintenance costs.
Maintenance and other type, yeah.
We typically, go to like NREL has like a technology baseline report, which I think include maintenance costs. Degradation becomes like an operational cost effectively
Yes, it's,
speaking.
yeah, it's not really operational cost,
Costs
but
are operational, sorry to distract, but these operational costs are a lot weather dependent also, right? They are also environment dependent.
a little bit.
Yeah, in the sense that
I'm
you need
just
to
asking.
provide cooling or you want to have constant temperature in the facility. So yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yes. So to summarize for the US, emissions have been coming down quite a bit in the last 10, 15 years. But if you look at the different sectors, most of that reduction is from the electricity side, the electric power side, because of the shift from coal towards renewables and natural gas. If you look at the graph like this, you could kind of argue that if we want to continue decarbonizing the system, we should continue reducing emissions in the power system and shift as much as possible of the other sectors over to electric power, because we have good solutions for decarbonizing the power grid. Yeah.
How I read the, let's say, current policy focus, it seems like the goal is to get the industrial curve way up. And so I'm wondering how that, what kind of global impact that would have.
These are US numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So, but now, like if we maybe simplify, we could say that in the 90s, early 2000s, we started with globalization. Some Asian countries had opened up their economies. The West outsourced some of the industrial production there, and now the goal is seems to be to bring some of that production back to the US, from what I understand.
Oh, yeah.
So then
yeah.
I'm wondering, how does the electricity or the CO2 intensity of power production in the US, or the marginal power CO2 intensity of power production in the US compare to the production that may be reduced, well, or some other Asian countries, but yeah.
Yeah, that's good point. You may know, I guess. Yeah.
But the shift hasn't really happened yet, right? I mean, they are saying industry US shift, US competitiveness, but has it really happened in terms of actual production here in the US? I'm not sure. I mean, the question is very valid, but we don't have any data on how much emissions the new shift inside the US is making.
The current shift, it's way too early to say. I think, how much impact is going to have these policies still to be determined, but it's a valid point that you're raising for sure. Yeah.
Maybe it's also an exercise in degrowth.
In
degrowth, with higher term. Okay, it's too controversial.
But yeah, so I think, I like to say that electricity systems are at the center of addressing the climate challenge.
Why are they at the center? When you talk to utilities, it doesn't appear that way. I mean, they're not changing anything. So what are we saying here? They're important, but I mean.
Yeah, because things are changing, emissions have.
No, I
been
understand the
reduced 40%.
demand, but is anything really
On
changing?
demand side to switch these
Or
other sectors over. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, no, I mean, it's changing, but not fast enough, you could argue.
I was talking about something else. Innovation in power systems is not taking place. Although it's the comment, because it's everything in the electricity systems are in center, but is there anything happening in terms of innovation? Are you going to talk about that? Like this grid modernization and whatever, is it doing anything? Or you're not addressing that today?
I
no?
mean, I think that's.
Next semester, I'll give it.
Bit of
One
pessimistic
talk.
view. I mean, we're all working on challenges that hopefully will make an impact one day, right? I mean, we as researchers, the industry community.
Well, I am deep into that. The tech transfer is really slow. Yeah, very slow.
Well, that is a challenge. And, but I'm trying to give a bit more optimistic view here, right? Because there are changes happening, and look at the dispatch plot from California. 10 gigawatts of batteries coming in a matter of 2-3 years. That's a big change. That's change, which is happening.
That's
fast.
on the resource side of the nodes, but is the grid getting better to accommodate those? That's or not? That was my question. Just
Fair
as a
question.
placeholder.
Yeah. Okay, but is this like a statement that you can agree to then, Maria, that we need better tools
Yes,
to analyze
yes.
these complex questions, right? And we need to rely on multiple disciplines and multiple resources, right? Or methods, because these questions are very interdisciplinary, right? So that's why I like this plot here. So I have a small quiz for you guys, actually. It's a history, it looks back in history. So who is this guy here?
Tesla.
Yes, that's right. This is a statue. Yes, Niagara Falls. I traveled quite a bit a couple of years ago. So, that's where he built the first, I guess, the AC transmission system to Buffalo. It was fueled by clean renewable energy, right? Hydropower from Niagara Falls.
What is he looking at?
He's reading a book.
I think the
So
plan was.
they have the same statue in front of the University of Belgrade where I went to electrical engineering because he's from there. So exactly the same statue. I have a picture in our website, ESG, me in front of electrical engineering with him. Yeah. So this is very special to us. Yeah.
That's from MIT. I think this statue is still there, right? At the entrance to the Barker Library in the Dome. Yeah.
I didn't know.
No. That's the basics for all the power grids we have pretty much around the world today, right? If you look further back in time, who is the guy? I mean, the guy up here.
That's you.
This is a little bit more of a stretch, but we use his approach a lot when we do optimization in general. but also-
Lagrange, is he Lagrange? Yeah.
Yes, correct, Lagrange. In Italy, where he comes from, Turin, Italy, and they even have one of the main streets in Turin is called Via Lagrange. I happened to come across this more or less randomly. That was interesting. 1700s, another guy from back then. Who could this guy be? This is in Edinburgh. Scotland. No. This is more about
Excellent.
markets.
Adam
side of
Smith?
things. Yes. He was arguing that,
Adam Smith.
Adam Smith.
Adam Smith was arguing that you
Nice picture.
to serve many goods and services to the public, markets can do a better job than those. And I think for electrical power systems, we still haven't quite figured out that balance between government regulation and market forces. So, that's still work in progress. Well, that's a great score for you guys. You are doing very well.
1 out of 3.
Okay, so I have a lot of material. I'll try to cover some of it. The first part is on capacity expansion modeling, where I want to give a brief overview and show some applications of these tools. The second one is a bit more analytical in nature. We've done some work on analyzing equilibrium conditions as we transition towards all the way to zero carbon electricity markets. And yes, I want to point out that this capacity expansion modeling has been around for a while. And these are two old early papers I was writing. The first one was a PSSC paper back in 2002. So it's also to say that I'm I was a visiting PhD student here at MIT back in the days. We built a model that was a systems dynamics model of investment cycles in the power market. It was in part inspired by, I was attending courses by John Sturman. I think he's still teaching more or less the same course. So we wrote a paper.
System dynamics?
Yeah, system dynamics.
So you were visiting who?
I was visiting Maria, that's Stephen Connors, who was here at the time as well. He passed away too early, but Maria.
Stephen who?
Stephen Connors.
Of the tragic story really here.
But yeah, this is a part of my PhD thesis. This is work that I did with Maria, building a stochastic dynamic optimization model to look at optimal investments in power generation under a centralized social welfare objective as well as a decentralized project. It's a great experience for me to come here to MIT. I remember Maria was like a fountain of ideas in every meeting we had, and she's still operating the same way. So that's amazing. Yeah, so that goes back and much longer back than this, but that was my early work on capacity expansion modeling. But things have changed, as we know. A couple of years ago, we did a review paper on capacity expansion models in the context of energy storage. And as we talked about, supply is changing, demand is changing. And that brings up questions around planning and market design as well. So we think that capacity expansion modeling, as illustrated here, you start with a bunch of data. Demand side, supply side, policies, etc. You feed that into an optimization model that finds the cost minimal mix of resources to meet demand in the future. That feeds into analysis that eventually, hopefully, can contribute to inform real-world decisions out there. Traditionally, this was kind of an activity that was done within electric utilities, within the power industry. But increasingly, these types of tools are used to inform policies as well. So, I think there's a good reason to kind of take a closer look at how these tools operate. So that's what we try to do in this paper. And I find the type of problem very interesting also because it does appeal, it does kind of address multiple stakeholders out there, from the power industry, but also the wider energy environmental policy domain. So
Audun, just a very general, stupid question. How much is these models actually being used by the decision? Because in comparison to, let's say, unit commitment or a dispatch model, which is an integral part, how much are they actually really used in practice?
That's a good question. So it's hard to measure, right? Because planning is it's not reflected in day-to-day operations like unit commitment and economic dispatch. But utilities traditionally they would do like integrated resource plans that feed into their investment decisions. Maybe one way of looking at this from a research perspective is that the amount of work that goes into these types of models has increased a lot.
Yeah, that's why it has increased so much. And I'm wondering whether there is enough demand for such a huge increase in the amount of research effort in this class of models.
So for which part?
For all of the whole class of capacity expansion models.
So I can comment a little bit on that green upper right. So what's used in the industry now is not physically implementable. So basically you do the optimization on some approximate model and then system operator still fine tunes it because of some details on voltage and reactive power and so forth. I think that planning in industry, a little bit that I know is even coarser you know?
Yeah.
So there is really disconnect.
There is
That's the
disconnect.
comment I made also, you know, there's so much we know and it's not transferred. And that doesn't really happen in high tech, you know, AI. So
Yeah.
what's going on with us?
Exactly.
That's
But
what
the tools, I mean, the ISOs are tools, they use these types of tools for their own planning purposes. The utilities use them, and I mean, from talking to people. I mean,
But they don't democratize it, right? So the point is that they are actually fine. And I mean, they made me talk to some ISO in California. I mean, they are not really open to try to really
not at all.
make it competitive and democratic, all these tools.
Yeah. But based on doing various studies, I do get the impression that, you know, some studies people actually do pay attention to and they get the attention out there.
Okay, I know this is being recorded, but I'm going to say it anyway. In response to your thing. So DOE has had very big programs with national labs on doing research on these areas. And one of their bigger pain points has been that how do you draw the industry to work with researchers, right? So doesn't matter, you look at any initiative, any consortium, everything. There is usually national labs, universities, and industry are there just, you know, they're there because they're supposed to be there, but they are really not included. And that disconnect we really have to worry about. Yeah. I think
that's
correct.
true.
I'm not
I think
making
it's
it
a
up.
fair statement, and I think it has to do with also with conservativeness of industry, that they are reluctant to maybe take up new technologies, new solutions. But then let's, you know, so this is
I should be quiet because I'll get my turn to talk one day. But the thing is that it's not just conservativeness. You have to give them this package, plug it in and turn this knob and just do it. It's going to do it for you. The transfer, it's adapting new tools. It's really a challenge.
It's true. They want to have commercial tools that
Right.
are with you know, good packaging, and so that they can.
And that's maybe where AI
support.
comes, you know, to smooth the workflow a little bit.
Yes.
That's maybe a one chance, yeah.
So at the high level, you're trying to minimize long-term planning costs, which includes capital costs and operational costs and various types of penalties potentially if for unserved reserves and energy, subject to constraints on the individual resources as well as on the system. You know, we have to meet demand, reserve requirements, transmission limits, and then you may have policy constraints as well, which could have to do with how much renewables you want or how much you want to reduce emissions. So that, as you can imagine, if you want to solve this problem at a large scale, you have to kind of make choices around what type of considerations your model takes into account, right? That part of maybe the art more than the science of doing these types of models, that you have to kind of tune your model according to the problem that you are analyzing.
Here you mentioned that integers reduce the computation time substantially.
Yeah.
Is this?
There are multiple papers on that. So that's like has to do with, you know, the unit commitment problem is down to the individual units. So you use binary variables to model the on-off decisions for individual power plants. Planning models, a trick that we sometimes do is that we cluster the power plants into groups and use an integer variable to model all those plants instead. And that reduces your computational burden substantially, although it does introduce some inaccuracies, but still. Right. And transmission is another area which it's hard to model transmission in detail in these types of long-term planning studies. So oftentimes you need multiple models actually to do this. But that's basically what the models look like. You minimize system costs subject to individual resource and system level constraints. And you know, are they used? I mean, yeah, researchers use them. This is a study by John Bisbein at EPRI from a couple of years ago. So he assembled a team of multiple, modelers. So like 10 or 12 different capacity expansion models. And the question was, how does the Inflation Reduction Act impact the power system in the United States, right? And And the models gave different answers, as you can see here. But if you look at the plot here, that shows you kind of what are the emissions likely to look at from the power system without the IRA in blue and with the IRA in orange. And, you know, they show a substantial drop in emissions. And that is because most of the models show a lot of green and yellow wind and solar power. You know, so there's a lot of replacement of fossil fuels with renewables. Now these days, of course, we have to ask the opposite question: what's the impact of reducing the IRA from the system? So that's also being done with these types of models. I guess, you know, going back, swinging between two, let's say, extremes in the policy landscapes is perhaps not the best way of achieving what you want in the end.
Have these models been used to understand welfare implications of IRA? So you mentioned in the previous slide, there is this LMP and market clearing prices and all that, right? So, but is there some kind of a welfare analysis that has been done?
I'm not familiar with like welfare in the broad sense. I mean, sometimes we do look at like the electricity market in isolation, how the welfare changes between producers and consumers in the market without considering the wider implications typically.
So has the IRA as a policy been analyzed in that context?
I think it's in the news every day now in Massachusetts. The prices of electricity have gone up.
Yeah,
the customers are paying more.
But what I'm saying is, are capacity expansion models usable for that purpose?
So, I mean, there are different types, right? I think when I say capacity expansion model, I mean primarily like for the power system, and they are perhaps too narrow in their scope to consider those wider types of questions. But you do have other models that consider, you know, a wider set of sectors that could answer those questions.
I think a really interesting question, and that's why I mentioned news. Why are the prices of electricity now shooting up? Anybody knows?
I mean, there are studies out there. I just looked at one study from Berkeley, and I think Deep, you share that study, right?
Why?
I didn't read it. One is going to read and present.
Also, we are doing passing of the ball.
Yeah.
So
No,
why?
but it's in a reading group. He's going.
Oh, so it's basically about the increase in data center demand. So so that's primarily, or initially that's the thought of people, but then a recent study actually showed that in places where there was an increase in data center demand, the prices were going down.
Yeah.
So that's
So I think this is really a regulatory question that I think has to be tackled sooner or later. When these load centers get on the system, why are the ordinary customers paying for it? I mean, this is, who's doing, Daniel Shen, he's not here. He's doing peak load pricing. If you increase the load significantly, you know, you need to build something for that. Those people should be paying for it. Now, customers, I think that's what's going on, but that's completely not justice.
I think there are nuances there. I think if you do like distributed solar energy expansion, you know, then you get some cost transfer. So like customers who don't adopt solar may end up paying more. If you do like large scale, utility scale expansion of renewables, prices tend to go down. So, you know, it all depends on the
in the presence of the peak loads such as data centers, is this statement that you just made is more general, or
that's more general, not in this context of
sure.
data centers. Yeah.
I have a question, and maybe you will touch it at some point. Like in planning, you plan for worst case scenarios.
Yeah.
And then the hope for those capital payments is going to be through peak load and, you know, charges during peak capacity. Does it come from some particular, like, is there an axiom why this is the right model that we do it? That we plan for worst case and then we'll make sure those capital payments come in when we charge for, you know, peak hours and all of that. The way we distribute the payments among.
There is theory around that. I mean, exactly the reliability part of it is a bit complicated though, because reliability is set according kind of an engineering standard, which doesn't necessarily align with the economic value of reliability. So that introduces some complexities. The last part of my talk, actually, if I get there, that we kind of show that as if you optimize the system based on a least cost system view, and if you set prices accordingly, including that you need to have high price during scarcity, then the prices turn out to exactly cover the cost of the optimal mix of resources. And that's been shown for traditional systems for a long time. What we did was to introduce renewables, introduce energy storage, and the same result holds, although it gets a little bit different once you move all the way to only renewables and energy storage, because then capital costs have to show up in the pricing equation.
So Daniel Shen, he's not here, he usually comes. He's doing PhD on that, but adding value of storage, but under uncertainty. That now messes it up completely. Who takes responsibility for something from now till 20 years that you don't know what the load is going to be and how much are the renewables going to vary? So that gets even harder, I think.
Okay, so let me show a couple of applications. This is a study that I did with Patrick Brown. He was a postdoc here a few years ago. We looked at, or he looked at, the value of transmission in decarbonizing the US system, and the kind of punchline is summarized in this figure here, where he looked at, like, if states plan the system individually, each individual state, that's the no state transmission case, what would the cost be of decarbonizing the system in that case? If you sum that up to the national scale, then we opened up for more and more coordination and transmission between the states, and we arrived at this cost down here, which is about half of the cost if you do this at the individual state level. So basically, by allowing for transmission between the states, you reduce the cost substantially of moving towards a fully renewables-based system. That study came out just as the Biden administration started, and I think it's fair to say that it did get some attention among policymakers back then. Yeah.
Is there any negative effects to increasing transmission and increasing the coupling between different states, in the sense that some states may pursue decarbonization policy while others don't, and there can be kind of is there any race to the bottom effect, like you might see with, tax policy, for example? And if I'm a state that's like temporarily increasing the cost of my electricity to pay for increased renewable generation, now I might be, there might be some shift to states that don't have that policy.
Good point. There are probably studies of those effects. I'm not familiar with that. I would say though that, if the US had a federal policy, that would be a more efficient, the most efficient solution, I guess one could argue.
This paper analyzes the congestion shifts happening in the transmission lines because of the new build-out.
It does, at an aggregate level, it does consider congestion between regions, but not down to the individual lines. And just one good thing about this analysis was that Patrick was able to build a model. Everything's linearized, so it's an LP, so he could consider 7 years of weather data and optimize operations over 7 years of data. So I think that's a nice feature of this study. And you can look at how it went from individual states.
Yeah, I'm wondering about the interconnection.
Yeah.
And so, is there a reason why we cannot synchronize all of the interconnections? I mean, that's like,
You mean the 3 interconnections?
yeah, that's what we did with Ukraine, right? Ukraine was synchronized with the Russian system, the war started, and so EU synchronized it with the continental electricity grid. So why?
No, it is physically synchronized. It's just they don't exchange as much power as they could in between the regions. So if you have cheap and clean power, they don't optimize the transfer in between. They don't treat it as one system, but system is physically synchronized.
Had a different, put DC links and different frequencies.
No. This is all AC. The entire US is AC. 60%.
You're talking of the statement you're making is about the Western interconnect or within the Western interconnect?
Between the Eastern interconnection and Midwest, we have three big regions,
Texas,
right?
yeah.
Maybe Texas is a little separate, but everything is interconnected. if you look at the power flow in details,
Yeah.
on these transmission lines, there is a lot of flow. And they are synchronized, they're 60 hertz. It's just that they don't optimize these exchanges at the US level or system level.
Yeah, and there's also very limited exchange between those interconnections, at least to
Yeah.
Texas,
Yes,
right? Texas
yes,
is very
yes, yes.
almost isolated, right?
Yeah, we,
In my office, I'll talk, because I have a startup that does, that this is known as a seams problem.
Yes.
Seams problem is I have a seam between the regions, like in between two pieces of cloth. It's known as seams problem. So like, I think restructuring has gone through so many stages, but Bill Hogan was very involved. How does PJM sell power to Midwest ISO? They're connected electrically, but I think the problem started because large producers in one region want to sell, and they want to sell to somebody in another region, and there is a seam. They have to go to each one to get approval, and they usually don't get an approval, and it goes from there.
Yeah,
Well,
to
it's
some extent.
technical. I would love to talk to you about it.
So we show here, and many others have shown that transmission is valuable. And typically you will get results that you see a lot of expansion in transmission here, and that leads to much less need for storage, and you need to build out less other resources as well. So that's kind of a straightforward story. How to build transmission, though, is, in reality, that is not easy because of various factors. People don't want those in their backyard. And that brings us over more into the policy landscape. And I'm glad that Tuan is here because he's been working on this. And this is an act, a proposed bill for the Congress coming out of the Senate, one of the senators in Colorado, where he proposed that, a top-down mechanism where each transmission region has to build sufficient transfer capacity, to according to 30% of the peak demand in each individual region. So that's kind of what this bill proposes, that each transmission region has to do that. The question is how will that impact the energy in the power system in the US? Would that be an efficient policy? What would the benefits be? What would the negative consequences be?
So what is this last point?
Yeah.
The last point, grid enhancing technology such as advanced power flow controls and dynamic line ratings. So
That's what all I do.
So
Okay, so you really have to, the thermal capacity is never utilized. It's 30% utilized of thermal capacity. It's all the rest is because of the reliability, because of the stability and stuff like that. So you need new technologies to fix that.
So in the context of this policy, it means you can meet that 30% requirement, not only by building new transmission lines, but also through other means.
by grid enhancing means. So the utilities have incentives for investing in these technologies or not? The grid enhancing technology, because building a new transmission line is one thing, enhancing through grid enhancing technologies is another thing.
It should be easier, right? Because
Easier, but then why are they doing it? From a policy viewpoint.
So I think right now there's a proposal coming out of a representative from Illinois,
Yes,
the Surge Act.
yes.
So what they're proposing is
Are you working on that thing
yes, with
with people?
yes. So the idea there is if the utilities are able to demonstrate that they can get some savings between two parts of that they can demonstrate that they can give some savings, then these utilities will be able to capture a portion of that savings. So that's the proposal. But in terms of the analysis that's needed for that to be feasible, for that to be implementable, that's not yet done. And that's why they approached CEPR and some folks in MIT to see whether that can be analyzed.
So you are analyzing it.
Not yet, but
we did analyze the Big Wires Act, right?
yeah, we have analyzed the Big Wires Act.
Similar settings. So team, Chris, Chris Nickel, is in Super, and then I guess Drew is not here, but Drew Story, he's in the MIT Policy Lab, and his job is basically to communicate and MIT research with relevant policymakers. So we had, in particular, Juan had many meetings with the people that try to advance this bill in Congress, and we were trying to do analysis in response to the proposed bill, and that's what Juan has been doing. And this is a working paper, but it's coming out very soon, right, Juan? He looked at what would the implications be of imposing this 30% interregional transfer capability between, was it 11 regions or 14 maybe?
So 12 regions, but then 11 regions, and then Texas isn't included because, yeah.
So this analysis builds on your paper with Brown, or is it a separate one?
It's a separate one. It's just about to come out, actually, the final version. So I'm hearing Juan imposed, like, as the bill indicates, you need to have 30% between each of the regions as a fixed requirement. That's what the bill states, which to me, as an engineer, sounds like a suboptimal policy. And if you look at the two cases, the upper one is with like a CO2 constraint, a strict CO2 constraint. The second one is with without that CO2 constraint. You can look at how the cost comes down as you increase the interregional transfer capability. But if you use a fixed requirement, that curve levels out relatively soon. If you optimize the amount of transmission capacity between each of those regions, you get a steeper decline in the total cost. So we're showing that using fixed transfer capability requirements is in some ways inefficient from a cost perspective. If you let the model optimize how much to build between each regions, you can get a better, lower cost solution. But we also looked at reliability impacts, and then in the story it's a little bit different, because in that case, so these different colors are like the optimal cost build out, and the fixed in green, the fixed build out in purple, and the is poor in gray. In some cases, if you build at the cost optimal plan, you actually reduce the reliability in some regions. But it varies between what region you look at. So like in the Mid-Atlantic, you actually move to less unserved energy with both of those implementations, but the fixed requirement gives you lower or better reliability. So it's a bit of a mixed message here, but from a cost perspective, fixed is not good. From a reliability effect perspective, it may perform better.
So between the time that you saw the bill to actually making this working paper, what is the time in between?
So
I'm just asking because I'm ignorant.
So the research commentary, we had to do it within 2 weeks. And then the full paper
was within 2 weeks?
So there were multiple outputs that we did for this work. For the research commentary, we had to come up with an output in 2 weeks. But our deal with them, or our conversation with the policymakers, was this will be an ongoing conversation, and we will put caveats saying that the initial work is ongoing. We will put everything, like all of our assumptions here in the initial work. But then like the final version of this paper, I think is 1 to 1.5 years after that initial conversation.
And it is not physically implementable. Let me add to that. That study is not physically implementable, so that you have to go back to technical things.
And why is the CEPA not doing that thing?
Because it has to go combined with engineering, deeper engineering, and we don't do that. CEPA does this work, and the engineering does their work.
I'm asking controversial questions, so I apologize.
But, no, it's really serious. This is very serious
So
question.
on that note, this is NREL, I mentioned Patrick Brown, who did the older study. He actually went to NREL right afterwards, and he's a key contributor to NREL's National Transmission Planning Study that came out last year. It's a huge study with lots of people and lots of tools involved. And in that case, they start out with like the type of capacity expansion models I've been talking about. They have an NREL version, of course, of that, but they also have, they move to more detailed representation of the power grid, down to the nodal resolution, and they do power flow, and I think they do stability analysis as well. So, as you can imagine, this is a huge undertaking, and that, with a substantial budget and many people involved. So people are doing that as well.
So will Patrick Brown come to give a seminar or to tell us exactly what he's doing at NREL? Can he be
We
pursued?
could invite him, sure.
Because it will be good for researchers to know what exactly, how life changed from here to there.
Right, yeah. Okay, so we are running out of time. Sometimes another application is to look at the role of individual technologies like energy storage. This was work that Jesse Jenkins, when he was still a PhD student here back in the days. We looked at the role of energy storage, and we showed that these are like the cost and value per kilowatt hour of installed capacity. It's 10 years ago, so with the cost back then, we didn't find energy storage to be cost effective, but with cost reductions, we kind of concluded that they could potentially play a significant role in the power sector. And you probably know Jesse, he has gone on to do a lot of work in this space. He's a key kind of user and developer of capacity expansion. That's his key work also, to speak.
He has a startup also.
Does he? I didn't know that. Yeah. And he's very much out there interacting with policy.
Rahman told me he has a startup.
He's taking a sabbatical for the startup.
To do the startup.
No. What would the startup do?
Rahman, what is the startup?
We will talk about it after the.
Okay.
Recorded.
Okay, yeah.
After the record, sorry.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit more about research stuff, but we have identified research areas. There are plenty of topics you can work on to improve these types of tools, from a pure math computational perspective, or perspective, if you like. And many of us are working in this space, right? So we're working on improved transmission representation. How do we represent weather variability in these types of models, including extreme events? How do we deal with energy storage, which is intertemporal in nature and kind of hard to model in some ways? So no shortage of opportunities. I was just at Informs last week, and there's a pretty big community working on these types of problems out there. These tends to be like large-scale numerical type of problems that we have to solve. It's hard to get. We have to simplify them a lot to get into like analytical closed form solutions here. But that is perhaps not the most satisfactory setting necessarily for researchers. But on the other hand, you can address problems that are relevant to multiple stakeholders out there. So maybe I'll just stop here, and then I'll save the second part of my talk for another occasion.
We can have 5 more minutes if you want to.
I can just give you the flavor of the This is Dworkin's work on using linear decision rules to speed up the solution of stochastic dynamic relations. Here we do like multiple agents competing in a game setting.
What direction do you think is the most pressing direction in this domain?
Well, I think Maria makes a good point in terms of saying that most of these tools are not physically implementable. So to adding more realistic physical constraints, that's important.
Is there a ask for it though? Like I understand that the physics is not as deeply modeled, but when let's say ISO level planning tools are required, have you ever seen anyone push for it, or they're fine with more?
I think the traditional setting is like I indicated with the NREF study, that they have multiple models that they connect, right? And I think that makes sense because you cannot capture everything within a large scale planning model, right? So to do this for like implementation purposes, you would want to start with the capacity expansion model, and then you do more detailed analysis of operational questions.
If I may, and this is a question which I sometimes have, is if you're planning 20 years ahead of time, there's so much uncertainty in costs and other things. Then for me to say that, no, make the physics exact and remaining thing can be uncertain. Sometimes there's a question is like, yeah, but then the solutions are anyways going to be just general approximate signals. So I can approximate in any way.
I think what we don't know how to answer is which technology really makes such a big difference in, let's say, that power transfer between utility. For example, let me give you, I mean, coming from engineering side, when California loses its DC line, you can put a little storage. You don't go unstable, very little storage and stabilize. You reduce the stability limit in an unbelievable way. And you can still operate the system getting power from around, from Idaho and so forth. So that storage has huge value for getting rid of that very conservative stability limit. So I guess, I'm just talking now open loop, we haven't talked too much about this, but how do we actually build some metrics between, okay, there are all these constraints and some matter, some don't matter. So which technology is going to really at the very large, have very large effects on, after I do the approximation, I didn't miss this, okay. I think that part just, that's where we are disconnected, right? Because I can talk forever and just bother everybody from the technical side, if I didn't do this, then I cannot, I have the stability limit or whatever, but there is no paper that will actually tell you in particular. Storage is very tricky.
It's tricky, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
very
interesting.
tricky, yeah.
Like, but I think then, it's a question, do you use your computational resources on capturing physics, the physics of the grid, or do you focus on capturing like the uncertainty, which is what we are trying to do here? So there's a trade-off there, right? You could argue that we do this stochastically, it's the first stage decision that matters, and you have time to adjust your strategy as you move ahead into the future, and perhaps you have time to figure out the physical challenges as well, but yeah, it's a good question.
Perhaps the best question.
From what I understand at the moment, we are solving a social planner model and we assume, okay, we have perfect foresight or we have perfect foresight about scenarios. And then at the end, we come up with some investment decisions.
Yeah.
But then when these decisions are to be implemented, it's going to be a political process because we are talking about huge investments and so on. So how, like at the end, do we just use the capacity expansion model as a die, so to say, that we throw to agree on how to build? Because probably there's going to be, I mentioned the optimal solution landscape is quite flat and it's very uncertain anyway. So I'm not sure how important it is to get the solution really right. And so I'm wondering what your...
So in a market-based system, and that's the philosophy in at least parts of this country and many other places, you don't really, there's no one that implements the output of your capacity expansion plan, right? It's more like a, it represents under certain conditions, you could argue it represents a perfectly functioning market. That's where you would move, or it provides like a guideline, a relevant, a benchmark that industry could relate to as they make their own decisions. As they say, all these models are wrong. Obviously, they can still be useful. For providing insights that's from a societal level, what would make sense if you want to achieve a least cost solution subject to policy and other constraints. And you can show, and that's the second part of my talk, that under certain condition, a social length by maximizing formulation would result in prices that exactly recovers the cost of the different technology, even if you add renewables and energy storage. So in theory, Adam Smith's hand would guide investment towards that system level optimum. But that's in theory. Of course, there are lots of complications, in particular policy always interferes here, right? So, and that's not a stable environment, that changes from one election season to the next. So it's always a moving target.
Thank you very much.